Good afternoon, friends. A warm welcome on behalf of RBSA. As part of today's knowledge sharing session, we have eminent panelists from J. Sagar and Associates and RBSA advisors who will share their thoughts on key financial, tax, and legal due diligence in respect of M&A and PE transactions under the new normal. RBSA Advisors, founded in 1977, is a leading independent transaction advisory firm offering valuations, investment banking, restructuring, due diligence, transaction tax, risk advisory, and litigation support. I am Ravi Shusha. I am a part of firm's financial advisory services practice and will be moderating the session today. For today's session, we are privileged to have eminent panelists from RBS as well as J. Sagar. We have Nitin Poddar from J. Sagar and Associates and Chetan Khandaria and Ravi Mehta from RBS Advisors. J. Sagar Associates is a leading national firm in India. JSA provides legal services to large Indian corporates, Fortune 500 companies, multinational corporations, banks and financial institutions, as well as bilateral and multilateral organizations. Nitin is a senior M&A partner of India's leading firm, which is J. Sagar and Associates. He specializes in public and private mergers, acquisitions, joint ventures and foreign collaborations, corporate restructuring, asset share purchase deals, private equity transactions, including leveraged buyout transactions, and business-oriented advice services to a variety of companies receiving PE investments. Nitin is truly a commercial lawyer. He's proactive and hardcore solution-oriented. He always tries and resolves any conflict by creating a win-win solutions for both the parties, keeping the core commercial interest of both the parties. Simple drafting, strict negotiations, and strict disciplines are his tools in any transactions. The Legal 500 recognizes him for being the most influential and significant lawyer in 2019. Chambers and Partners London in M&A India and commentators appreciates his proactive approach and his ability to get the deal done. During this lockdown period, he has started India Power Talk, a webinar platform wherein he invites international leaders to speak on how to revive India's growth story. He is a frequent speaker at several conferences and seminars organized by leading industry institutions and chambers on subjects like takeover code, M&A and structuring of joint ventures. He is a member of International Business Committee of IMC Chamber of Commerce and Industry. He is also a member of CII's Western Region for the Startup Committee. He is also an artist and has exhibited his painting in the Jehangir Art Gallery of Museum, which is in Mumbai. Chetan is my old colleague and a good friend. He leads the transaction services practice of RBSA. He focuses on buy-side due diligence and deal closing review, vendor due diligence and vendor assistance, advice on sale and purchase agreement, business transfer agreements, as well as assistance in deal negotiations. He is a chartered accountant by profession, and in his area of more than 25 years, he has worked across various industries, both for strategic and private equity clients. He has been part of some of the very large market transactions and fairly complex transactions as well. He has done his MA in Yoga Shastra. He is both a yoga student and a yoga teacher as well. He is a follower of teachings of Brahma Kumari University, and he is also currently learning Sanskrit. So very versatile personality in that sense. Ravi also is my close friend and a colleague from long. He leads the M&A tax practice for RBSA Advisors. He focuses on deal tax advisory services for M&A transactions, covering tax due diligence, tax structuring, deal negotiation support, transaction documentation and post-deal integration, corporate restructuring solutions covering ideation, evaluation of various forms of group structuring, as well as financial restructuring, succession planning, which is an important aspect for many large business families, as well as also provide support for implementation of various processes, including mergers, amalgamation, demergers, spin-offs, capital reduction, share buyback, and subsidiarization, and so on. Ravi is chartered accountant, and in his career of more than 20 years, he has advised number of large and complex M&A and corporate restructuring transactions, both from M&A tax regulatory perspective. Friends, we are passing unprecedented health and economic crisis in India as well as globally. The operating performance of many businesses are expected to be impacted significantly. The working capital cycle of many of the companies stand elongated as compared to what it used to be. In many cases, losses are often funded by extended credit period, leading to a negative working capital. While all the companies wish to conserve cash, at the same time, they will need cash to sustain the operations as well as grow the business and also explore any suitable opportunities for M&A if available. Needless to add, there are long-term or there can be long-term structural changes in many of the industries, which often poses challenges from a deal perspective in terms of how would the industry evolve over a period of time. The evaluation of such companies and businesses is more complex and challenging than ever. Our senior panel members will share their thoughts on the key financial, tax, and legal diligence aspects, both for M&A and PE transaction in the new normal. Chetan, to start with you, does the emphasis on due diligence increase during this unprecedented time? And how do you think that the new normal will impact the deal process and the way the diligence is conducted?
Okay, thank you very much, Ravishu, and welcome everybody. Given the uncertainty of the situation and how long it will prevail, the emphasis on due diligence should increase. This would help the client take decision along with their commercial understanding of the business and the future trends. So if we just go to the basics, why the diligence is conducted: to validate the basis for investments, assist in the evaluation of the business and adjustment to the valuation of the business, financial, strategic and business inputs to be taken care of either in the business agreement or in the business valuation model, generate good negotiation points, also highlight areas for warranties, indemnities and inputs for definition, the operating EBITDA, working capital definition, debt, and identify any deal breakers. Very critical to understand the changes in the operating structure, whether they are temporary or a new normal, a fundamental change, and that could be also one of the reasons for a deal breaker. So the focus of the diligence would be broken up, if we broke up into two parts. The first would be the actual operating results. The second would be the management plan for the upcoming 6 months, 12 months and 24 months. Definitely it will be a dynamic plan, very sector specific and also very progressive operating plan, because it's very uncertain. So the things will also evolve in the plan. So the key emphasis from a diligence perspective will be the assumptions made to the management plan, and that need to be critically evaluated based on the diligence issues and the findings, and also compare the same with the past results. Second, the key emphasis will continue, I'm saying, because it was always there, that what are the fundamentals, how the financial statements are prepared, how the MISs are prepared, how detailed is the MIS, what are the reconciliation items between MIS financial statements, what are the management estimates used. This would be the very key. The other aspects would be, we have this virtual data room, which have been, ongoing, which have been the norm, but these are going to increase only. It's not going to come down. But always the virtual data room or the VDR, which is normally called, it's always followed with the physical visits to the company. So the purpose being, to review, or we can say overview the systems, the controls, the documents, etc. And it needs to be seen if there will be a physical visits, and if yes, then to what extent the physical visits would be there. And this aspect needs to be taken care so that it does not impact the overall deal process. The other aspects which I would like to highlight, all the teams will have to work in a more coordinated and cooperative. All the teams normally work in a coordinated way, but here the emphasis is more coordinated, because I'll give an example. Say there could be many violations in the contract terms, and which will have financial impact, commercial impact, and the legal impact also. So all the teams have to, in a way, work in a coordinated manner. So thanks, Ravi. Thanks, Ravishu. I have just answered your questions.
Thank you, Chetan. Ravi, your thoughts in terms of how do you see the emphasis on the tax diligence changing times and in the new normal?
Yeah. Thank you, Ravishu. Yeah. So first of all, I agree, with you and Chetan, the perspectives around this new normal. So as rightly said, the pre-COVID aggression is, going to get replaced with caution and value consciousness, in this new deal world. So classically, there have been three focus areas around tax, in a transaction. First one has been, the target historic risk. The second is, the target transaction cost, and the third is, unlocking target's hidden reserves. Now, for historic risk, in my experience, the gravity of historic tax risk can, actually make or break a transaction. If we were to, talk about transaction costs, this could be, in form of capital gains tax, stamp duty, or, GST. An optimal tax structure can, minimize transaction costs for both the parties. And, from hidden reserves perspective, now generally this is, incidental agenda. So say there could be, hidden tax benefits which target may not have availed thus far, but, the buyer can. So all these can be, tapped through a thorough tax diligence and, a robust acquisition structure. So in my view, the thrust of these three elements would continue to exist even in, the post-pandemic scenario. The only exception this time could be that, the risk-bearing appetite of the transacting parties could be way different from, what may have existed pre-COVID. So with management platter already full with, knock-on factors of pandemic, they won't have, any additional appetite to digest any new tax controversies. And hence, the approach, especially on the buyer side, ought to be more conservative going forward. Now, given this agenda, my first focus, if I were to do a tax diligence, would be to check, whether target has suddenly resorted to, any aggressive means in his tax affairs. Now, this could be, with the urge to, save cash due to the crisis. And for this, he may have taken aggressive tax positions, either on the expense side or, on the income side. Now, if there are any, material deviations from the past, and I'm not saying that it is always incorrect, but it definitely, needs deep analysis in terms of its sustainability and authenticity. The other value areas, which I can think of from, pandemic perspective, under tax, which may get impacted, going forward, or, one has to be mindful of. One is, transfer pricing. The second is, POEM, or what we call place of effective management, if there are any, risk around that. Third one, if I can, recollect, is, the value of tax balances, which may, which could be either in form of MAT credits or, tax losses or any other deferred taxes. Next, I can think is, possibly tax impact consequent to any contractual renegotiations or termination. There could also be tax impact on account of, any debt restructuring, which is, taken by the target consequent to this crisis. And last but not the least, one has to be mindful of indirect taxes. So all these tax issues would have a bearing on, either of the three pillars of diligence. That is, the quality of earnings, or the net debt adjustments, or, the working capital adjustments. Yeah, Ravishu.
I think the Nitin had got disconnected, probably because of some connectivity issue. Maybe he'll reconnect. I'm sure. Moving on, from a financial diligence perspective, what are the key challenges which you face, Chetan, when you're doing the financial diligence in this current times? And any specific area of focus which you would do in this uncertain times?
Yeah, so Ravishu, due diligence definitely is never an easy task. So in the normal circumstances also we face different forms of challenges otherwise. So for example, protracted time for the due diligence, restrictions on the information flow. Sometimes the critical informations are likely to be withheld, or it's just given at the end moment. And normally, the speed of the diligence process, it's always, as of yesterday. That's the mindset. So the diligence challenges are always there. But while we will follow the normal diligence procedures, but I will just focus on few items where I think the special emphasis should be made. So I'm just breaking this up into two perspectives, from a broader perspective and then going into further detailing. So as I mentioned earlier, the robustness of MIS would be quite critical, and deriving comfort on those 12-24 months management plan and their assumptions basis the historical results. The other important aspect would be how detailed is the management plan, whether the management plan captures all the upsides as well as all the downsides, the vulnerabilities, because we also want to understand the worst case scenario. And assess revenue and margin loss on the commencement of business post pandemic. So we just would like to understand whether this phenomena which has happened, it's a temporary blip or a structural shift has happened. So if it's a fundamental change, then just need to go into much depth. Then analyze the monthly cash flow, the working capital position, the existing debt repayment terms, the restructured debt repayment terms, it's already been made. What is the moratorium period? And we all know that the moratorium period was till June or maybe till September, and it's not going to help. So, what are the dialogues, what are discussions which are happening with the banks, with the lenders for this extension? And what are the business restructuring measures
Ravishu,
which are initiated by the
Ravishu,
company?
sorry, Nitin Poddar here. I have lost my web connection, so I have joined in as through the phone.
Thank you, Nitin. Thank you very much. We'll continue with the discussion, and maybe we'll definitely connect back to you. Thank you, Nitin.
Sure. Okay.
Thank
Okay, sorry, I'll continue. The business restructuring measures which are initiated by the company, where the company has more than one businesses, that also would be quite critical, because due diligence on a carve-out business has its own challenges. I would not go into detailing into it, but the basis of preparation, the common cost, the completeness of the financials, etc., etc. So then coming to the specific things. So are there any major changes in the business terms? The supply chain, the customer contracts, the supplier contracts, the lender contracts, the collateral, the loss of customers, the market share, and there could be many such minute details which one would like to understand. And when it comes to customer and the supplier contracts, you will have a volume commitment. There will be pricing terms. There will be a lot of forex fluctuation. How those impact needs to be in. And all this thing will have a risk of their enforceability at some point of time. And also the timing of those revenue and cost recognition, one would like to understand. And of course, it will have a legal consequences, but I would have Nitin to take it up when he's discussing his part. There could be something on the sales, the pricing strategy. If the business plan talks about new products, then whether those new products are included in the plan and what are their basis. What are the monthly production sales number, the closing quantity, the capacity utilization trends? What was there in the past? What's there in the present, and what they are going to achieve in what they are planning in the future? And are there a major dependence on the customers and their suppliers, and also whether they are still continuing or they are not continuing? What is the status of the order book position, which is going to be quite critical? The other aspect would be effectiveness of existing distribution network, the supply chain system, availability of inventory with the supply chain, and we can go to specifics. It could be endless list kind of a step, but I have just restricted myself to the broad key items which one will need to focus on.
Sure.
And of course, we'll speak about the other aspects, the quality of earnings and other things separately.
Sure. Nitin, coming back to you, how do you see the emphasis on the legal diligence changing in these times? I mean, is it likely to increase? Would the focus areas change? Any thoughts on this?
Joined in. I think I was just able to join in. Just give me a minute.
Nitin, are you able to hear me?
Yeah, yes, I am joining right now.
Thank you, Nitin.
Can you see me? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we were just thinking of
sorry.
Your thoughts in terms of the emphasis.
Yeah.
Whether it would
Thank you. Thank you, Ravish, for your kind introduction. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you well.
Okay, very good. So thank you, Ravish, for your kind introduction, and thanks to RBSA for hosting this webinar, and thanks to all the audience who have joined today. Great to see you. Chetan and Ravi has been a great to interact with you, and also thanks for inviting. Ravish, to answer your specific.
Yeah, it's our pleasure to have you on the webinar.
Thank you. And my sincere apology for this last minute reach, because I just lost the Wi-Fi connection and this again reconnected back.
No.
So Ravi, to answer your specific question as to the emphasis on due diligence, whether it has increased, I would say not just 100x or 200x, I would say 1000x. And I mean that honestly. And I guess before agreeing or even commencing any deal currently, the ability of doing a full-fledged due diligence would be really the key driver, and I guess that is what will emphasize the importance of a due diligence. Earlier, if you see, we used to enter a term sheet, agree on valuation, and do lot of initial roundabout stuff, and then we used to commence the activity of due diligence. Today, that's not the case. Friends, honestly, we are living in an extremely unprecedented time wherein the entire world is locked down. No one knows whether it is a first phase, second phase, or the third phase. I'm not sure whether really the worst is over. If you ask me, the new hard normal that we all need to understand is that virtually every company might have defaulted or breached their contractual obligations or the license or approvals that they must have obtained. That's the hard fact of life. And they need to be very careful about the same. Everyone needs to really check out and put some defense mechanism, according to me, to avoid any future complications for them. In doing so, friends, we must try to protect the core. For example, your key customers, suppliers, strategic partners, investors, and employees. Chetan mentioned, you mentioned that key fundamentals are important, and I am saying we need seriously to find out whether there are key fundamentals post-COVID for the companies. We cannot afford to have, friends, any other major shock like COVID-19 in our operations. Therefore, it is necessary, I guess, to do a thorough housekeeping, find out critical things if they are intact, and if not, please, we need to work on them. Ravish, you asked me what's the new normal. In the last two decades since 1991, in the era of globalization and information technology, we all have learned one word, and that is rebooting. In the context of personal computers, nobody thought that we will have to reboot our own lives, our own all businesses, the entire society, and the entire world. The old theory of Darwin, survival of fittest, has now become old. The new theory would be survive every day. That's the new normal. The words past, present, or future has no meaning. That's not the new normal. The new normal is today and now. In many cases, I have been in discussion with a couple of companies right now, and trust me, their plan B or plan C or even plan D have become plan A, and that's the new normal. So I guess we are really living in a very very difficult time, if I may say so. But at the same time, I am very happy that that this has given us an opportunity to completely reboot the businesses. Some businesses, yes, they will have difficult times, but some businesses may do really extraordinarily brilliant. Now, one thing that cuts common across all these businesses, whether we are in a restructuring mode or we are not. Earlier, Ravi, Chetan, you all will agree that earlier, only when we planned of doing any restructuring or M&A transaction or some corporate restructuring, we thought of due diligence. Today, that's not the case. Due diligence is going to be a norm, a normal. Whether you are entering a restructuring or not, due diligence you will have to conduct a due diligence, because there are so many complexes. The laws are just complex, and added to that, as I told you, I'm humbly saying this, and very not with any malice or otherwise, but virtually every one of us, trust me, would have breached one or the other agreements, and as we speak also, we might be breaching some agreements or some obligations. And we need to be aware of that, friends. Trust me, it's a very serious issue, because we cannot expect, trust me, and I'm making a very serious statement here, we cannot expect tomorrow the courts to support you. Don't be under the impression that courts are going to come and hold your hand and say, no, okay, you are protected because you were facing a COVID situation. That's not going to happen. So this is the extraordinary time. Due diligence, and I really appreciate you taking this title as emphasis on due diligence. Yes, emphasis, not emphasis, it must endorse, underline. Due diligence is critical. Whether you are in a restructuring transaction or not, irrespective of that, you have to do for our day-to-day operations to run smoothly in an ordinary course of business. We need to do a thorough due diligence at a regular intervals. That is the new normal, I would say.
Thank you, Nitin. Chetan, coming back to you, we were discussing in terms of this quality of earnings, working capital, and the net debt adjustments, which are quite critical from a diligence perspective. Can you elaborate a bit on that?
Yeah, thank you, Nitin, for emphasizing the need to do diligence, and I strongly, agree with you. And we need to live in the present, and that's what my yoga guru teaches me, that you have to be in the present. I don't know whether I'm able to do that or not. That's a separate thing. Uh, coming to the assessment, coming to the quality of earnings. So there are three aspects which quality of earnings, working capital, and the net debt. Because ultimately, any diligence report and any diligence findings would have these three key element in their report. So if we start with quality of earnings, the basic emphasis is assessment for the normalized quality of earnings. And in this normal, new normal, whatever you call it, as Nitin mentioned, you will have plan B, plan C, but ultimately you will start with plan A. So things are so dynamic and fluid. So we just need to understand the impact of the management plan to sustain the business, and how it's going to impact your quality of earnings. What are the impact on the revision in the contract terms, and whether you need to factor few of them in your normalized earnings. And there are a lot of commodity price fluctuations are there. So just to give you an which will have an impact on the revenue as well as the margin. For example, USD was about 70 rupees in December, and it was 77 in April, and now it's about 75. So you can, and the crude oil prices are also going down. So one will just need to understand, to what extent it's going to impact your normalized earnings as you move ahead. What's going to be impact of the labor and the employee cost revision, and their sustainability, because a lot of workers are also have migrated, they have gone back. Also, what's going to be the ongoing versus one-time maintenance capex? You always incur a maintenance capex on the normal course, but here we just need to distinguish that what is the normal maintenance capex and what is the one-time which was required to restart or reboot the operations. Also, what's going to be a one-off and the non-recurring cost, say renegotiated rental cost, whether it's going to be one-off, one-time, or it's going to continue. What are the technology upgradation cost? What's going to be the traveling cost versus the communication cost? And of course, one also need to look at the underlying arrangements and the contracts to understand the revenue recognition or the cost recognition of them, and also the contractual implications if you are not honoring those things. And the most important and not the least, also the companies may evaluate the terms of their insurance policies, and what's going to be the possible compensation surrounding the loss of profits which have happened. I don't know how you need to factor that in your normalized computation. Coming to the working capital, anything which has quality of earnings impact, it also has a corresponding working capital impact. So as you rightly mentioned in your opening remarks, that the working capital cycle may be elongated or it's elongated, and people would be working on the negative working capital due to liquidity and the cash conservation policy. And the tendency will be always to focus more on collections and delay the payments to the extent possible. So it would definitely be a challenge to define what's going to be the target working capital so far as the historical trend is concerned, because it may not be indicative of a go forward working capital, at least in the immediate future. Because when we are talking about immediate future, it could be 6 months to 24 months, unless we all come to a normalized normal. Also, the working capital trend on the opening of business post lockdown will provide limited visibility. So one really need to do a deep dive, try to understand how working capital cycle would go quarter on quarter. One also needs to understand what are the impact of the customer and distributor contract revised terms under the new normal. Try to adjust your one-off non-recurring items, and try to work out some kind of a targeted working capital, and which of course need to be supplemented by the management judgment also at the and also the client need to be comfortable with those target working capital. And when we talk about working capital, receivables, inventory play a major role. So one really need to understand, critically evaluate the receivables, the collection, customers' willingness to pay and customers' ability to pay. They are totally two different things. Where there will be a lot of willingness to pay, but because of this problem, the ability to pay may not be there in the immediate near future. So, are there any arrangement? Are there any factoring arrangement which are being done or which is going to be done? So, close scrutiny of the customer's ledger, the aging analysis. Similar on the inventory side, the inventory value, the prices may have come down. So, how you value your inventory? Cost or NRV, whichever is lower, cost selling price or NRV, whichever is lower. Which are the inventory which are near to expiry, which are obsolete inventory. So one need to just look into those into much detail. Now coming to net debt, again the classic thing would be the liquidated damages because of non-fulfillment of commitments, contractual commitments, the customer contracts, supply contracts, and while the legal team, Nitin and his team would be working out what's going to be the legal implications. We need to understand the financial implications, and that's why we have to work in a more coordinated manner to understand those impacts. What's going to be the liability if you're factoring your trade receivables, discounting your trade receivables? Are the employee termination severance payments, whether gratuity policy, are the discounting rate, everything has changed now because of this? What are the overdue trade payables under the new normal? Normally the trade payables should be giving a credit of 30 days, 60 days. Now they would have become 90 days, 120 days, and they would say these are the new normals kind of a thing. So one just need to look at it a holistic way when you are evaluating, working capital, net debt, quality of earnings, and most important with the related party balance. How you need to treat the related party balances. They could be a part of your working capital balance. They could be part of your debt, or they could be just funding right now, so that you are into normalcy. And then what are the capex obligations? And when the capex are done through a finance lease, then it becomes a different kind of a complications. And also, what are the probable outcome of major contingencies which are reflected in the balance sheet? Are they really going to be the provision is required for that? Recovery of the deferred tax assets, because the future is uncertain and you have a deferred tax asset which are sitting there. First, while Ravi will come out with from a tax application, but from a commercial perspective, whether you really have profits to take care of those deferred tax assets. What are the legal exposures, the tax exposures, and how you need to quantify them, either by a debt like, or you bring out everything in your agreement or somewhere by of indemnities or representations. Now, I'll just stop, pause, and Ravi, I know it's not a valuation session, but since we are talking about quality of earnings, net debt, working capital, which in a way is related to valuation, because a client is definitely going to apply some multiples on the adjusted historical trends, and you being a valuation expert yourself, would be good just to understand briefly, not in a very detailed manner, your views on the challenges which may come in this kind in the valuation.
Chetan, I opted for being a moderator to answer the questions. But I mean, just to summarize, I mean, maybe briefly, I mean, you rightly said that it depends on the industry in which you are operating, and it's very important to understand whether it's a temporary blip or it's a new structural shift which has happened. So we were doing, let's say, a valuation recently for a power company, a fairly large power company, which had a purchase of a purchase price, power purchase PPA already available with a pass-through mechanism, and a dependence on the merchant capacity was much lower. So over there, the impact possibly was maybe a bit mitigated because it was funded through a budgetary support as far as the state discoms are concerned. We are currently doing a valuation for an online and e-commerce entities where the client believes that the valuation should have a positive upside because the shift from an offline to an online could be much faster as compared to what they had thought maybe 6 months back or a year back. We are doing a valuation of a road company where we are yet to receive the traffic projections. It's a toll road company. at least the thought is that it's an industrial corridor, so the blip, if any, would be a temporary blip, and it could be 6 months, it could be 12 months, 18 months. Nobody would know exactly, but maybe a temporary blip rather than a structural shift. So it certainly depends in terms of the nature of industry, and you rightly said whether it's a temporary shift or it's a new normal. If it's a temporary shift, we need to see various scenarios. I mean, will the recovery happen in next 6 months, 12 months, 18 months? Will you go back to the pre-COVID scenario, or will it still be some sort of a permanent loss? So many of these are unanswered questions, and we also learn for a period. So that's what we are. Moving on to you, Ravi. I mean, from a tax perspective, what are the key challenges which you face for the tax diligence in the current times, and any specific area of focus which you'll do in given the current uncertainty?
So, Ravi, I will possibly break this in three parts. Although I already mentioned that the various aspects which are the value areas to look into in pandemic. So, first one I may pick up is the case of transfer pricing and POEM concerns under diligence. So, transfer pricing and POEM concerns they come in when the target group is spread in more than one country. So if there are, intergroup arrangements between entities located in different countries, then the same would be governed by, transfer pricing provisions. Now, if the group is compelled because of the crisis to, significantly change its operating modalities, and, this could be on account of people or operations or finances, then it may warrant a revisit to, their existing pricing arrangements. So if I were to, elaborate this a bit more detail, this pandemic has compelled organizations, as Nitin was mentioning, to adopt to remote working culture. So several organizations have accelerated their fintech and artificial intelligence agenda to facilitate remote working. You will also find governments of many countries harping on self-sustainability agenda. Now all of these could lead to groups undertaking reallocation of their functions and risk between countries. And if that's done, then Target will need to also revise their pre-COVID pricing policy between the group entities. This effectively means have a relook from a transfer pricing perspective. Not to miss that, select reorganization of operations could also lead to exit charge trigger under transfer pricing, which too may have tax consequences. So that was the operational side. I will come to the financing part. Now, due to the crisis, several countries, including India, have made stimulus announcements. Now, this could be, in form of moratoriums or interest waivers, rate reductions, new lines, etc. All of them intended for cheaper and quicker liquidity to business. So, with the availability, of these cheaper funds, the question would be whether there is a need to, revise the pre-COVID benchmarks, which may have been, used by targets for, receiving debt from, its group entity. Now, if there's a local availability of cheaper funds, then paying higher debt servicing cost to group entities could lead to controversy. Clearly, one other aspect of financing is guarantee fee. Now, say the target is availing parental guarantee for its local borrowings, and they also have in place a guarantee fee arrangement which is pre-COVID. Now, if the COVID say has triggered a downfall in credit ratings, now does it merit a revision in this earlier arrangement? Something definitely worth pondering. There could be honestly many other instances, and one must inquire whether Target has made any changes in its earlier TP arrangements. If yes, are they adequate, or do they pose any risk? It wouldn't be surprising if some of the companies even approach tax authorities to renegotiate their APAs, which is advanced pricing arrangements, due to the changed circumstances. Coming to the next one, the POEM side. Now, the remote management compulsions could also lead to companies getting significantly managed from territories that's outside its country of registration. So if Target Share has got a foreign entity, foreign subsidiary, or any other foreign group companies which is getting now monitored from India, or managed and controlled significantly from India. Now in India, unlike the relaxations, made in the residency rules, for individuals, more specific changes have thus far been announced, in the POEM rules, which is, the place of effective management rules for management of a foreign company. Hence, such remote management from India, could presently attract taxation on, foreign entities at almost, you can say, 43%. And, incidentally, the international tax body OECD had also issued a paper, to enable countries address, this permanent establishment issues under the pandemic challenges. In fact, many countries like US, UK, Singapore have, already issued clear-cut guidelines under this in their domestic law. However, unless the Indian government, also takes some similar initiative around POEM, that risk remains, hanging on, the remotely controlled entities today. So the scope of tax diligence will definitely have to be enlarged to, particularly check, if such risks prevail in the target. I may also, touch upon a few other areas. One could be, the sensitivity, as Chetan mentioned, about the quality of tax balances. So when we talk about, tax balances, I may emphasize on three areas. One is the unabsorbed tax losses. The second is, the MAT credit balances, and third is, of course, the deferred tax balances. Now, as most of us would be aware, any unabsorbed loss other than depreciation and speculative loss is available only for 8 years. So while a target may believe that it has a large bundle of, past losses, which could be a valuable asset, valuable tax asset, what needs to be seen is whether the crisis impact would allow full utilization of these losses. If not, then its value, must be discounted, from the purchase price. Likewise, a similar situation may also exist for, unabsorbed MAT credits. Now, whether the compromised circumstances would allow full utilization of the MAT credits is definitely a question to be pondered in tax diligence. If not, then its value must be impaired and discounted, from the purchase price. And there would be also cases of deferred tax liabilities, not getting provided in books. Take the case, say a target has any investments in a foreign subsidiary. Pre-COVID, the target management, may have believed that it will not bring in, any surplus cash sitting in this subsidiary into India for a pretty long time. They may be wanting to plow back, or they may have any other agendas around it. And which is why, they are not provided for any dividend tax on, such foreign dividends coming into India in their deferred tax liabilities. Now, if the pandemic is now likely to compel them bring back this cash, then the tax cost around it, if it is expected in the near term, it will have to be added, in this deferred taxes, and accordingly, will also need to be factored when you are adjusting your, purchase price. Apart from this, I think there is one other issue around this tax losses, which may be relevant in the current times. So if a target has, unabsorbed losses, tax losses sitting in its books, which, it had received from a merging company due to any past merger. Now, I think many of us might be aware that any loss rolled over consequent to a merger are governed by the conditions of Section 72A. Now, one of these conditions under 72A is that target has to achieve certain prescribed capacity utilization in the 4th and 5th year of the transferred operations. Now, under the COVID circumstances, whether such utilization, is feasible to achieve and sustain is definitely a question every buyer has to introspect, before they value these losses. If not, clearly, this value needs to be discounted, from the purchase price. So deep dive, into these areas would be relevant while, you are conducting tax diligence in the new world. I also have a few other aspects to, discuss, but I will, leave it, for others also to, pick it up. I'll take it up later.
Nitin, from your perspective, what are the key challenges which you face from a legal diligence perspective in the current times, and any specific areas where you would wish to focus?
First of all, I would like to, offer my complete sympathies to Chetan on the valuation front. It will be very, very interesting It will be a very interesting time for all the valuers, I guess, to value a company where there are most of the pre-contractual terms are violated, and there is no sight of new revenue in the company.
You hit on the head. So
So anyway, Ravishu, and I'm glad that we are having this discussion on a lighter note, but on a serious note. Whilst on one hand, when we say that the due diligence is the emphasis of due diligence is really more and important, I must say that the quality of due diligence, the whole exercise of due diligence, will have to be relooked. Particularly, I'm saying this with all honesty and frankly, that due diligence in any transaction, due diligence is an exercise which is always slightly neglected area, slightly delegated to junior lawyers or junior accountants, and it is considered as a secondary importance in the whole transaction arena. The most important part is the valuation, the most part of the commercial terms, and due diligence is something which is dekha jayega. Due diligence typical hai na, that's the attitude. Now I would say that look, that those days are gone. Trust me, those days are gone. So I have always maintained that in M&A or restructuring or private equity, the most important critical piece is, historically also I used to maintain that due diligence is a critical piece, and today I still maintain that due diligence is going to be a really absolutely critical piece, and there is no scope for any shortcut or excuse or pardon. The biggest challenge is going to be the virtual data room. We are all aware that companies don't offer, and again I'm making a very frank statement, that companies don't offer complete documentation in the first round. Let's accept that as a ground reality. Vendors always wait for the purchaser to give a list of documents and then start preparing and think of preparing a detailed case, detailed list. So I would say it's an extremely important thing to prepare a very carefully crafted list of documents. And I would emphasize here more is that importance. Accounting and financial due diligence should be prepared together, or at least both should work hand in hand. That's very important. Getting all the documentation in one go in the first is the first biggest challenge. We will never get the whole entire set of documents in the first go. That's not our culture. That's not our practice. We have to virtually fight and argue for documentation. That has been always the case in India. Virtual data room, to my mind, is the second big challenge now. Though we are used to do due diligence on virtual data room, but I would strongly recommend that certain key documents and allied documents along with the key docs, along with the main documents, have to be physically handed over and analyzed. As I mentioned too, that we all know that most of the companies would have violated or breached or the contractual obligations. We need to find out and understand the impact of that violations. Okay. The third challenge is that most of all consultants work independently. As I mentioned, due diligence has to be a coordinated effort between accounting, legal, and even forensic and technical, if I may say so. It is important to hold. First of all, it is important to hold detailed meeting with the clients and all consultants together to understand the apprehensions of the clients and what are the critical things that he is looking at. What is he want us to investigate? And accordingly, I guess it must be a concerted effort from all the consultants. It can't be an action in isolation. Most importantly, I would say during the whole process of due diligence, hold quick meetings, hold very frequent meetings of all parties and start sharing the concerns with each other. That is very important. I have seen, and I'm sure you will agree, that typically what happens is that the financial due diligence takes place independently, the legal is conducted independently. They don't talk to each other. They converge only at a later stage, and then the due diligence DD report is exchanged to find out what are the implications. I would say no, don't rush to the report. Hold short meetings, quick meetings between the consultant and share whatever you have got. See, today is the time where you have to be extraordinarily vigilant and careful. I would rather I would, this has been my practice always, that whenever I do a due diligence, I break into three parts. One is identify deal breakers first, identify value impactors, identify actions where corrective steps need to be taken, and the last is collection of the facts. So whenever we do a due diligence, my focus always has been first identify the deal breakers, understand what could be the deal breakers from the client, what could be the what are the value impactors, and there I closely work with people like you, the people who do financial due diligence. We need to understand the value impactors, and then we work very closely also with the company's compliance team, secretarial team, to find out what are the corrective steps need to be taken. So if you break the due diligence into three baskets, I would say identify deal breakers, value impactors, corrective actions, and the facts. Ability to hold physical meetings is going to be another big challenge. Even if we want a physical meeting with the key management or some key personnel, I don't know how much are we going to really have that. So maybe we can have of course, the video conferencing, but still inability to hold physical meetings is going to be a challenge. Online verification is now possible virtually. We can do online verification for most of the compliances, from whether it is Bombay Stock Exchange, ROC, or whatever. So my request will be really, and I'm sure the government is taking care of this, but government needs to step up their computerization programs. I would say, why are you only offering us the documentaries? Some kind of artificial intelligence need to be utilized by the government itself. Why can't SEBI, for example, identify the violations which are already committed by companies? Why can't the stock exchange? I don't think so. Why should it be so difficult? All the like they used to identify the companies who have not appointed women's director or independent directors. Similarly, all the filings are made with the stock exchange. So if artificial intelligence is applied, if the formats are standardized, why can't the Bombay Stock Exchange or any exchange can throw information about what are the violations, what are the serious issues? In fact, I will be curious to see now, because one of the conditions under the listing agreement is that you need to mention or intimate the stock exchange important developments. My question is, again on a lighter note, I'm saying, as I've been maintaining, I want to see which company notifies the stock exchange that I have violated 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 contractual obligations, and these are the implications. These are serious questions. Now, again, as I mentioned in the beginning, we are rebooting. The entire world is rebooting. So this is the time. If we are looking at making India a big growth, 5 trillion story or a growth story for India. These compliances, e-governance, artificial intelligence to government websites, ROCs, Bombay Stock Exchange, all file. This has to come in. We need support from them. It can't be that historically, if you recollect, we used to, as junior lawyers, we used to sit in the ROC office at Marine Lines and conduct physical due diligence. With the peon is to get physical copies. Now those days are gone. Fine, we have improved, but we have improved only by an inch. We have to really progress in leaps and bounds. If we really want to attract larger investment, we want to attract strategic investors, and more than that, forget strategic investors and forget the strategic partners, foreign partners. If we Indian companies, if we have to grow, we need to really invest our time into making our company completely absolutely crystal clear. And so these are my factual position of every company has to be crystal clear. Now, the day we reach that situation, just take today, unfortunately, any deal transaction today, whether it is listed or unlisted space, if you talk of an M&A in a listed space, we are talking of minimum of 1.5 to 2, at least 1 to 1.5 year. Going through the SEBI approval process, going through the NCLT process, it's a long time. Now, why can't certain time be cut down? And in that, the major piece, Ravishu, is 4 to 6 months of due diligence. A proper thorough due diligence, whether it's financial, forensic, technical, legal, everything. Now, this all time can be cut down if the companies themselves create certain packages of information, and the stock exchanges, SEBI, ROC comes up with some kind of artificial intelligence and throws some data. Now, minus all that, you and me are going to remain busy. Those things are not put in place, you and me have a good business, fine. But again, no, I don't think so. We all thrive on the shortcomings of the government or shortcomings of any companies. So I would say, just to cut down the story short, on due diligence, there are going to be challenges. The key thing is identifying a perfectly tailor-made checklist for documentation depending upon the company. You can't throw a standard checklist. A checklist of a cement company cannot apply to checklist of an acquisition of a finance company or an e-retail company. We need to tailor make. We need to really tailor that. The consultants, financial due diligence, legal, everyone needs to work together, agree on a process of having short meetings at regular intervals, identify value impactors, identify deal breakers. They'll deliberate with our clients, deliberate with the other side, and move ahead. Challenges are going to be there, but we need to be innovative. We need to really find ways and means of getting hang of the issue as such, which is being talked, and proceed from there. Because again, I'll tell you, unless we are diligent, unless we really put in that extra effort, things are really going to be of a challenge for the companies.
Sure. Thanks, Nitin, for the perspective. Chetan, Ravi, coming to you, in terms of the focus on the transaction documents, any thoughts, particularly from a tax perspective?
I would say that deal documentation is nothing but culmination of all the tax negotiations between the parties to make it legally enforceable. So generally, our suggestions on deal documentation go hand in hand with what we suggest during the negotiation stages. Now there are 4 or 5 areas that I can highlight. The first one, these are mainly from a tax perspective. So the first one would be condition precedent and condition subsequent clauses. So with parties becoming more conservative, emphasis on matters like tax NOC and withholding clearances would definitely increase. Also if you are missing compliances like TP study or revised tax filings to do away with any past incorrect action, and same also will be insisted as part of CP and CS clause. The next area is reps and warranties and indemnities. Now parties that might have been earlier open for shorter indemnity periods could now look to insist for a longer one. So generally for taxes, the recommended period is 8 years, as the period of limitation under tax law is up to 7 years, and parties factor an extra year for any tax proceedings to complete. Additionally, insistence on RNW insurance or an insurance for covering material tax litigation risk would also increase in the current times. Of course, much of these would also depend on which party is on the stronger side, but that's something one can be mindful of when you're going for a transaction. Now one other aspect which is also a critical aspect surrounding deal documentation is the incorporation of clauses to materially affect the agreed transaction structure. Now you will appreciate that both form as well as substance are essential for a transaction structure to achieve its slated objectives. Apart from this, there could be other areas like tax definitions or completion deadlines or closing tax adjustments, which could hold the key from a tax standpoint. So careful build-up of documentation to cover up for all these tax aspects is critical, and this will not only help in cost savings but also avert any nuisance value for the management going forward. So over to you, Ravish.
Coming to you from a legal perspective, what are the things which you would take into consideration from a deal documentation perspective?
Ravi has really mentioned really very critical, important parts. I would touch up only. I guess we are running short of time, isn't it?
5-10 minutes, it's okay.
Okay. So quickly to say, yes, in the given situation, I have always followed very simple process of documentation, Ravi. I believe that documentation has to be very simple and straightforward. It should not be dependent or it should not be created based on some international precedents. That's the wrong way of handling things. I'm not saying that we don't follow international precedents, but ideally the approach should be having documentation very simple. That's number one. Secondly, in the given the current situation, reps and warranties and indemnity clauses is going. These indemnity clause and rep and warranties they were always the the best part for lawyers, I would say. But I think we have to be very responsible and we need to negotiate rep and warranties. Yes, fair enough. Rep and warranties backed up by indemnities and guarantees, holdback amount, all those things is fine. But the critical part here is, to my mind, the simplicity of the document. The more you are able to keep the document simple, the more it is possible to get interpreted correctly. That's number one. Secondly, don't keep difficult situations vague. That's the wrong way of handling. Avoiding any issue or not addressing the issue because of paucity of time or because we don't have that much of time to negotiate, I think that's the wrong approach. We need to be simple, yes, but we need to address and capture all the critical aspect of a transaction. If we don't capture and keep it vague, don't expect the courts tomorrow to sit into your shoes and understand the situation as to when did you exercise the transaction and give a decision in your favor. That is not going to happen. So that's very important. And most also, I would always recommend is that before we start the drafting of documentation, during the negotiation stage, I always encourage parties that if you have negotiated, if you are entering into discussions, reduce your discussions or reduce the agreements that you reach in bits and pieces into some form of emails or put some memos or some minutes of meeting or whatever. Well, that will really help us through the negotiations. Many times I have seen people verbally negotiate, agree, and they only give us a term sheet for converting into a documentation. And we are not privy to the negotiation that happened for at least couple of months before the term sheet was signed. So even if the term sheet is signed or before the term sheet is signed, if you have agreed or if you have reached some conclusions, I am not saying firm agreement, but even if you have reached some conclusions, please exchange that and put it into writing. Because that will form the basis on which we lawyers can prepare the document, the detailed document. The most important part is, I would again, like I've broken the due diligence part, I would say documentation I break into a couple of basic parts. One is you need to write the complete basic preamble of the document. It is important that you write the recital so nicely and clearly to set out the whole construct of the document. People don't give importance to this preamble, and I think I don't agree with that process at all. You need to really spend time in narrating the whole reason, purpose of arriving at that transaction. That is very critical. The more clarity you give to the preamble, the more it is going to be helpful tomorrow to interpret certain definitions or certain closing conditions or whatever. Thereafter, I think the conditions precedent, closing conditions, and considerations and the key actions, all those things must be looked always from a macro level. I have seen lawyers, and unfortunately I take the blame to myself. Lawyers cut and paste the conditions precedent, whether they are applicable or not, and they they pick up some precedents and put it in the document, and then it becomes very difficult for them to retrieve. So my request will be, tailor make again the conditions precedent, closing conditions, closing actions, post closing actions. These are very critical things. I have seen a lot of transactions where I was not a party to the transaction, but I was involved only to resolve the issues with regard to closing conditions. Because the conditions agreed were such complicated conditions that the parties could not close the transaction because of those complexities. So again, closing process, currently because of the international investors, a lot of investors come from abroad, opening of foreign accounts, opening of bank accounts, transferring funds, transferring shares. The closing process, it's not very complicated, but people don't pay attention to the closing processes. So I would think, these are certain things which are on a macro level. If they are properly agreed and addressed, I think documentation is not a big challenge. But document, again I repeat, good document is not a substitute for a bad partner. I repeat, Ravishu, good document is not a substitute for a bad partner. You may have fantastically negotiated document, but if the partner is hell bent to violate it, you cannot do anything about it. And unfortunately, the unfortunate part is the judiciary in India is very slow. Even if now we have arbitrations and we have interim orders and everything is fine, but still, nobody in India wants to go to the realm of enforcement of an agreement. So it works both ways, to my mind. It works both ways. So documentation is critical. I don't think so anything has changed because of COVID, but yes, based on the due diligence report and based on the inputs that you people give on financial aspect, those things will have to be captured correctly in the rep and warranties. But before jumping to drafting, I would say identify the issues, make the parties sit across each other and agree on some kind of a rational operative process on how to handle those issues. I think that should be fine. But the only the mantra is keep it simple, keep it straight, keep it focused.
Perfect. You summarized it. Chetan, coming to you, from a financial diligence perspective, any specific areas of focus from a deal documentation perspective in the current scenario?
Yeah, thanks. I agree with Nitin that the mantra, the documentation has to be, as simple and less ambiguous as possible. But having said that, sometimes, it may work the other way around. But first, I feel that there's going to be an intense negotiation and discussions in the transaction documents because the diligence will throw so many issues, which will be compelled. A client will be compelled just to renegotiate a lot of terms. The other aspect, because the future is uncertain, and we discussed at length, the what could be the normalized earnings, what could be the valuation, and all those things. They may try to come out with some kind of an earn-out mechanism structure where your deal is signed, but something is also left for the future, and that becomes very ambiguous kind of a stuff if you have not defined those aspects very clearly. So, say for example, you are just saying that I'm going to take X percentage based on today's EBITDA and some percentage based on say FY21 EBITDA or FY22 EBITDA. You just need to define it very clearly. What's going to be the definition of the financials? It's going to be prepared under the Indian GAAP, the Ind AS or the normal Indian GAAP. What's going to be the basis of preparation? What's going to be the accounting policies? What's going to be the computation of revenue, definition of revenue, definition of EBITDA, definition of operating EBITDA, and also the corresponding definition of receivables and inventory. Because you don't want a situation where EBITDA has increased, but corresponding receivables and inventory have also increased. So one just need to balance both the aspects in your definition, so that it's not left to any ambiguity. And I'll just try to quote one small example. It's nothing to do with this COVID. This happened many years back, where we had done diligence and we had pointed out some Indian GAAP revenue recognition issue. But both the client and the target company were saying that this is something we follow this. So ye to chalega, we can live with it because the impact is not going to be substantial. When at the time of closing, of course, it was as per Indian GAAP. The closing accounts will be framed as per the Indian GAAP. And because the closing accounts strictly were framed as per the Indian GAAP, that revenue recognition hit was a big hit on the closing accounts. And it so happened that the seller had to pay something back to the buyer. And the seller was saying, this was not the intention. Why should I pay back? I have given you that EBITDA, I have given you that receivables, that inventory. And then both the parties had to rework and renegotiate. And they were saying, ye understanding nahi tha, this was not that, this was not that. So as Nitin pointed out, you just need to be very clear and upfront when you are discussing this in your negotiation, and just be aware of it that everything is getting documented in a proper way. So I think there could be a lot of other things, but I'll just restrict this to key important things for the time being. Thank you.
I want to just add one small point here on documentation. Chetan and Ravish, you all will agree with me that in lot of times, many instances where foreign investment comes in India or private equity investors invest in companies, they are fully aware of what is legally tenable and what is legally not tenable. I would refuse to believe that any private equity investor, whether it is domestic fund or overseas fund, it is not aware of what is how much can I take out from the company, how much will be my exit value. They are fully aware of this fact. They're aware of the legal restrictions in terms of exchange control. They're also fully aware of what are the regulatory framework. However, they still say, they'll still tell you, no, please find out how do I get out, or how do I get paid of this. And then comes the solution of side letters and parallel agreements and that kind of stuff. I would strongly recommend that yes, we can be as innovative as possible and come out with a very innovative structure to meet your commercial needs, which may not be strictly in compliant with the legal requirements. I would honestly and very humbly suggest, and this is not the time where you should be adventurous on this. If you are adventurous, please also bear in mind that look, this may or may not go through. Then don't make a huge hue and cry of this kind. Look, the parties are defaulting. No, parties are not defaulting. You have entered a wrong agreement. You very well knew how much can I take out and how much can I cannot take out. What will be my exit price and what will be not my exit price. You very well understand this. So my only submission here is yes, if it is the need of the fund, if it is the need of the investor, that yes, I need to get XYZ of return, that's fine. But then take a call. It's a commercial call. Don't blame the failure of your commercial call on the legal framework. That look, the legal framework is not supporting. See, whatever we may say, the exchange control regulations in India are very conservative. We don't allow lot of structures and lot of hybrid instruments like in US or in European country they allow. We don't allow those kind of instruments. But there are investors who are very fanciful and who want to introduce this kind of fancy terms and try to create this kind of documentation or structure and show that look, yes, we have got around the regulatory regime and we have got this document. Please don't do that. This is not the time.
Certainly. So it's been very interesting session. Just to summarize, due diligence has always been an integral part of any transaction, and in these uncertain times and an unprecedented the way we are living, the need to have an in-depth and a very good quality financial, tax, legal due diligence is something which is the need is more than ever before. The need for all the advisors working in a more collaborative and a cohesive manner, keeping the documentation simple, documenting the commercial understanding, and ensuring that that this is within the ambit of law, or this is within the ambit of the spirit of law, if I were to articulate. We need to be very mindful in terms of the deal scenario in the current times. Thank you very much, Nitin, Chetan, and Ravi. It has been a pleasure having you on the panel. Our privilege to have all of you on the panel and sharing your thoughts. Dear friends, thank you very much for the session, and we look forward to having you on the subsequent sessions as well. Take care and God bless. Thank you.
Thank you, Ravish. Thank you, Chetan.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.